Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Metaphysical Podcast. Have you heard the stories of NASA airbrushing out evidence of life on the red planet? How about government projects using jump rooms powered by electromagnetism to send people to Mars? Sounds crazy, I know. And don't even get me started on the esoteric side of Mars worship. If you want to hear investigative research from me, Rob Counts, and remote viewing data from the psychic spy himself, John Vivanco, then stay tuned because you're in it for a show that's out of this world.
Yes. And if you are listening to the Metaphysical Podcast or watching us on a video platform, please leave us a 5-star rating and review to help us reach even more people here. Make sure you also like and subscribe wherever you're watching us. And welcome to the show.
John, how you doing?
Good. Mars is one of my most favoritist locations.
Really?
I always, when I was a kid, it was like I always dreamed of being able to go to Mars. I wanted to go there so bad, and I don't know why. I mean, that place is just phenomenal. So much so that I've done massive projects on Mars, and that's the thing. It's like there's so much going on there. It's like you could spend forever doing one thing.
Interesting. So when you say that place is phenomenal, what do you what does that mean? What does a remote viewer mean by that place is phenomenal? Because most people think that this is just a red, barren, desert-like planet.
Right. Most people think that. I have this real big thing for treasure hunting, relic hunting, using remote viewing to get me close to making strange discoveries out in the field. And a lot of that has to do with lost civilization type stuff, finding evidence of things that don't line up with normal narratives. And Mars is one of those places that would be an absolute dream for that. Absolute dream based on what we've seen.
And is that because there is allegedly a previous civilization that was populating Mars?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. There was a previous civilization populating Mars.
Because that is what the previous CIA remote viewing data showed, is that they were having the remote viewers remote view Mars in a distant past, and they were seeing that there was a very different type of species living on Mars that was trying to find a way off because I guess industry had affected the planet too much. And one of the things that I think is so interesting about Mars is if you really think about it, right? It has this red look to the sand. What has a red look to it other than rust?
Yeah.
So was there an
iron?
Yeah, was there an enormous amount of iron buildings and stuff that had depleted down to nothing over millions of years and created the red residue that we see on planet Mars?
Yeah, I mean, who knows? I don't know. I don't know about that because when we've remote viewed, these things that potentially could be structures, we get more of a natural type structure that's built from the earth there, or from the ground there, from the Mars there, I guess you could say. And so it's like they're large bricks and molded pieces of that Mars surface.
So stone, like stone and organic substances that built there.
Right. But they're massive. They're massive. I mean, when I first started to remote view Mars, it was really early in my remote viewing career. It was like we were doing a lot of stuff that was just terrestrial, business type based, intelligence based stuff, working think tank. And then on the side, we do these side projects. And I really wanted to investigate what's going on in the Cydonia region, because
face on Mars
claims, right? The face on Mars, but not just that. If you look closely, other people have really mapped out these what appear to be, these artificial structures in that whole area. And when I first, I didn't have any opinion on it, no opinion. So basically, the face on Mars, for instance, tasking it to remote viewers and running a project on it, it was like the tasking is literally describe what this is, and then you could also do something like describe how this formed. Viewers will get a geologic process, or they will get subjects that are building this type of thing. In all the data, it was always subjects building it. It was always a massive structure that was like the ceremonial seat of this area, if not Mars. The whole region, the whole Cydonia region, was actually sitting on the edge of an ocean, a very shallow ocean, and there was a lot of foliage.
Now,
And
this is the distant past, right?
this is the very, very distant past, and a lot of the beings who lived there would make pilgrimages to this location. It was very it was like a mix of primitive and advanced, what we would consider primitive.
Kind of like Avatar, kind of how it's
kind of like
I'm
Avatar.
trying to draw a comparison, right?
So the people that we saw there, the subjects that we saw there, were a little bit short statured, and they had more kind of a reddish skin, much like native Indians coming out of South America, for instance. Now, when you get to the CIA stuff, there were like levels of civilization that were on that planet throughout time in general. And so they caught this other aspect when they were remote viewing it. And so the deal with that area is that was like a newer civilization before Mars basically got abandoned. And these subjects left, or they were taken off the planet because of the destruction that was going on. But these subjects, so you have to think. So right now on Earth, we're pretty isolated as far as, other races go throughout the universe. We're pretty isolated, if in the multiverse, really. But there was a time where it was known that there were other races and there would be interactions. And so that race there then had interactions. There were other beings coming there. There was like trading and stuff like that going on. So yeah, I mean, it's such a fascinating place. So if you were to go there today, like put on your Indiana Jones hat, really, because like you're looking at, like when we were remote viewing this stuff, like you go into the face, there's these dilapidated entrances with these massive columns, like Corinthian type columns,
Really?
that have partially collapsed, and you're looking at like this massive hall, so big, so freaking huge, it's unbelievable. And it's like there's pottery shards littered everywhere. There's like just remnants everywhere sticking out of the sand from this lost civilization that was primitive, but not primitive, because they had influence from these other races coming in.
Whoa.
Yeah. I mean, how can you not love that stuff?
Yeah.
Like, seriously, if you're a person who loves to go out on expeditions, treasure hunting, and doing all this stuff, I mean, Mars would be the place. Like, can I hitch a ride? Come on. It's like, can Basiago like do something for me and get me over there? I mean, geez, it'd be amazing.
So, who John is talking about is Andrew Basiago. Yeah.
I don't know how he says it.
Basiago.
You should know, because he is going to be president.
Italian. So Andrew Basiago, he ran for president in 2016, actually, as an independent. I don't know if you knew that, but
I knew that.
Yeah. And he actually claimed that he was in this thing called Project Pegasus, which is a time travel project that was run by the CIA and DARPA. Now, those of you at home that like to poo-poo on stuff will probably think this sounds crazy, but you can look into this. And of course, if this was true, they're going to try to hide it. So it's kind of up to you what y'all think out there. But his father was involved in politics. From 1980 to 1984, he and others were sent to Mars via these things called jump rooms, right? And he says that he was groomed to be the president when he was young, and that he and Obama actually roomed together briefly when they were being briefed on future information. So this just keeps getting crazier. And what's strange is that there's actually this Wired article that we found that basically attempts to address this. And the article is the headline is White House denies CIA teleported Obama to Mars.
They had
Of
to
course.
deny that.
Right. It's a very, very funny picture they've got here. Obama when he was young with these glasses on. Yeah, and then there was a CNN op-ed about this too. So what Andrew Basiago had said and claimed actually was enough for them to actually create some articles to do some counter
It's weird, right?
information.
It's a
Yeah.
little bit weird.
Like what I think is so bizarre about this, John, is that if you think someone is crazy and completely out of their mind, why would you even address it?
Right.
Unless you're actually there's like some type of PR effort to hide something.
Right.
Not saying necessarily this, but something.
It is weird. It is weird. I mean, the White House press report, what could have been tongue in cheek, but why would they even bother? Like you say, why would they even bother?
Yeah,
That is a weird one.
so this Project Pegasus is really interesting because the project did revolve around time travel stuff, and people are very, the subject of time travel is a very interesting one. I mean, look at our pop culture and movies. Like everyone wants to see a good time travel movie, except Time Cop. That movie was terrible.
Time Cop.
Do not watch Time Cop with Jean-Claude Van Damme. You will want those hours of your life back, or you won't. Maybe maybe it's one of those B movies that you just love to hate. I don't know, but yeah. I mean, what's interesting is this time traveling stuff. Andrew Basiago, they ended up developing what he was calling chronovision, which was this, and this relates to the Montauk project, which you and I have been talking about back and forth on this.
I think Montauk comes up nearly every episode.
For good reason, actually.
Yeah.
I mean, there was so many things intersecting at Montauk in the Montauk project that they were experimenting with, allegedly, reportedly, from different people. And yeah, I think this chronovision thing, basically a system which he said generated a hologram of a past or future event by driving an electromagnetic signal through an octagonal, which is an 8-sided array of bismuth crystals. So now crystals are coming up again, John.
Right. Right.
I mean, we just had a show all about that, right? Recently. So gosh, yeah, octagonal, excuse me. I mispronounced that. Thank you.
Sacred geometry, right. Shape, power of shapes. I mean, power of shapes. Shapes are interesting. They do things. I think it's Dan. Who wrote that book? Shape Power. I can't remember the name of the book. Really fascinating book on the study of shapes and what they do energetically. I mean, I think that's like a hugely overlooked thing. And I think that when you get into these high technology things that are very esoteric, I think that shape plays such a huge role in the function of these things.
Well, I mean, from what you and I have been seeing, that is very true. I mean, even like if you look at the back to those experiments that Dr. Emoto did, where he was talking to these or doing experiments on these ice crystals and their formation, we would often see these different shapes coming into being from the different words or feelings or things that you were imbuing into the crystals, right?
Right. Yeah.
There you've got a bunch of hexagonal shapes, and yeah.
Well, that's the thing too. When you get to Mars, I mean, again, it's like you've got pyramids there in the Cydonia region. And when we look at that, these pyramids were used for energy generation. It's the same thing. It's like no matter where we find pyramids on other planets when we're remote viewing, it's like this thing that follows mammal civilizations across the universe. This knowledge, this basic knowledge.
Yeah. And it's like where there's civilization, you'll find their discovery of these shapes and their use.
Right.
And also, I mean, it could be like you were saying, like if there are these ancient civilizations, were they learning from one another at a time when there was more social interaction or a cosmic social interaction between them.
They were absolutely learning from each other. In fact, I mean, you want to get really crazy, let's get into the jump room crazy side.
Yeah. Let's do it. Let's get into that jump room crazy side.
Okay, so anyway, first, before we get jump room crazy, let's get like, ancient Mars crazy. So what we saw in remote viewing data was that the beings on Mars who were at that time inhabiting it and living in the Cydonia region, there were a number of different things that were going on. One of those things was absolute total pollution that was happening across the planet. There were wars going on. Some of these beings had been messing with fission type weapons, nuclear type weapons. And so these beings that were at war were not necessarily from that planet, but these beings who were living on the planet, native to the planet, were getting pulled into it and getting involved. And during that time, there was a huge explosion. I guess you'd say it would be like had to do with something in our asteroid belt, where our asteroid belt is currently right now wasn't necessarily there before, is what we had seen. And there was a lot of warring going on, and Mars got caught up in it. And the asteroid belt exists today. And I mean, here's the thing. So the asteroid belt doesn't have a lot of mass to account for a planet-sized body. And so this is a huge contentious issue.
This is so that you're saying that the asteroid belt back then was different than the asteroid belt.
There wasn't an asteroid belt back then.
It wasn't. So this is an exploded planet or something.
Planetoid, or a couple of them. And so we saw that occur with our remote viewing data, and the debris from that, it shot everywhere. I mean, a lot of it was absorbed by Jupiter. And so that would account for not a lot of debris in that asteroid belt currently. I mean, because I think like the debris in the asteroid belt right now accounts for like a third of the moon, like the mass of our moon, something like that. Very, very small amount. And in fact, you can go through the asteroid belt and not see another asteroid belt, or another asteroid. Right, exactly. Right. Because they're so far spaced out.
That makes sense.
So anyway, Mars got caught up in this, and the beings who were living on that planet were like, okay, this is crazy. I mean, this is crazy. Like, they were transported here to our planet and established the cultures in South America.
I was just gonna say, is this the red people?
Yeah,
that the ancient past said were there.
Yeah. So that bloodline from that planet continues through, the indigenous people, what we call the indigenous people in South America, Central America, Mexico, mostly like central, and it wouldn't be so much south. It'd be like central. Mayans, Aztec came out of that, Toltec. In fact, when you get to before, like, okay, so a lot of these ancient structures here on Earth that are mind-bendingly wrong for the culture, according to our current science, these structures were built by that civilization that came here, and they were helped by the ones that dropped them off here to build the civilization, right? This is like pre-Toltec, but our scientists, archaeologists and whatnot, attribute those structures to Toltec, but then they say the Toltec weren't that sophisticated. The Toltec didn't build them. The Toltec were another rendition, like a later rendition off of the ones who were deposited here. So that's crazy talk when you get to like,
who's gonna believe that, right? Like,
who's gonna believe? Nobody's gonna believe.
I can't get people on Instagram to believe that pyramids might generate some type of energy. Never mind, like,
Why are you even trying? Why are you even trying?
It's people have a strange reaction to information like this. I mean, how do you corroborate it, right? We'd have to literally go to Mars and prove it to people, and there'd be,
And here's the thing, and the thing is that they would say, well, we have been on Mars. We are on Mars, and we get all the data from it. Haven't you seen all the pictures? I mean, NASA's a public agency, after all. We basically own NASA, so they have to give us all the information. So we're not being lied to. We're not being hoodwinked. We don't have the wool pulled over our eyes.
Right.
So that's the attitude, people,
which is a very unfortunately naive
It's
attitude.
unfortunate because that is what's going to crush this planet. That attitude.
Mm, that's true. Yeah,
Yeah.
because then it's this ignorance to what's really going on under
Right.
in the shadows.
Right.
Okay, so yeah, there's that, but then the Cydonia area of Mars also is. We were just talking about that. It seemed like you wanted to get a little crazy on that too.
Well, I kind of did get a little crazy on that with like them bringing the subjects from that planet to our planet to seed this planet.
Absolutely.
So that's where I felt like it went a little crazy as far as information goes. I mean, this is the stuff we've seen with it. But when we get to the jump room kind of stuff, that's a whole other ball game. I mean,
that was the jump rooms. That's what it was.
Yeah, the
But
jump rooms is like crazy mixed bag of stuff.
Before we get to those, Lindsay, can you pull that image back up that you just had up? Have you seen this image yet? That was taken on Mars.
It was a doorway thing.
I mean, look at that.
I think it's actually really tiny, right? The context is hard with this photograph.
It is hard. I don't think this is tiny.
It looks cut.
It looks cut is the thing. It looks very specifically cut.
Right.
And there is the ridge. The other one was a better quality photo.
Is this the one? This might have been one that we had remote viewed. The
problem with this is that it's really easy for quote unquote experts to say, oh no, what you're looking at is a really tiny thing, or it's a really whatever. And then, it's just, we've dropped it. Like there's no longer a discussion going on because experts said this.
Right.
And we don't know, actually. All we know is that this image was found, and it looks very, very interesting, to say the least.
Yeah, it does. I mean, there's a lot of interesting
things on
Mars. Yeah.
And I'm sorry, but the proportion of these rocks and stuff do not look miniature by any means.
No,
like when you look at miniature structures, this is not what we're looking at the side of a cliff here that clearly has an entry or some type of cut entryway to it. That's strange.
Yeah, that is really strange. I mean, to me, it's not surprising in the least bit, just because of what we've seen in general. I mean, it's like that whole marijuana leads to heroin thing, where it's like you see these like little cut doorways, and you're like, yeah, so what? Who cares? Like, yeah, I know they're there. Well, let's talk about the really weird stuff, like the aliens that are there that chase out remote viewers, or let's talk about like the portals that the breakaway society has been creating on Mars to travel back and forth to Earth from, or whatever.
No, really, let's talk about that. Yeah, so I think I want to talk about these jump rooms right now, and also I want to get into the case of, at some point, Percival Lowell, because I think what he found back in the day while he was doing his research was really interesting, and how it devolved from there also. Right. But the jump rooms is just a way more fascinating subject. So what the heck's going on with these jump rooms? It's like the jump rooms, or did they exist?
Well,
or do they?
So, all right. So, I mean, it gets really weird, convoluted, hard to figure out with remote viewing in general, because when you remote view somebody, for instance, remote viewing Basiago.
What is it? Basaggio.
Okay. We should know that because he's our future leader, man.
So wait, Lindsay is saying that it is Basiago.
Okay.
So there.
All right, settled. Lindsay's the boss. So we like remote viewing him a couple different times to try to understand like the reality of his experiences provides a huge mixed bag. So let's just say in one instance, remote viewing him, he's like literally, he's got like mind-numbing fluids being dripped into him on a hospital bed, right? And then he's like walking around in a daze, like with an IV drip. And he's like being broken mentally, right?
Tripping, yeah.
Yeah, he's like, there's something going on, and the data refers to MK Ultra type situation with the subject. Then you remote view him again, or you remote view a different circumstance, and he is going through a portal, right? There is this energetic void that is spinning, and there is some interaction that he has with it, or he's like in an area where in some kind of like high technology structure where there's an interaction with holograms, right? So you get like all of this weird different stuff completely mixed into these stories when you remote view them, like everything from total brainwashing to make a person believe a certain thing to straight up, yeah, some of this stuff actually is truly happening, right? And that takes us, like to Montauk, because this is the Montauk type technology. And they all basically said a lot of the stuff that we saw with remote viewing. So I know that these guys are basically very, very truthful, like Al Bielek
and Preston
and
Nichols.
Preston Nichols. So with those two, especially Bielek, he was really trying. He had these slivers of memories, and he was really trying to figure out what was going on. And some of his stuff is like stretching too much. He doesn't actually know, and so he's filling in the gaps. And some of it is straight up, okay, yes, this guy did go to Mars.
Well,
right?
and
like,
what's
literally,
strange
we
about
saw
this?
that he did go to Mars.
Yeah. So what's strange about this, everybody at home, is that Al Bielek's story and Preston Nichols, who wrote the Montauk Project, their stories parallel with one another incredibly well, like to the point where if this was a hoax, they would have had to really sit down and write the entire thing out very carefully and then memorize it, which is like an enormous amount of work because you'd slip up at some point, right? But what is true is that I found too is that this MK Ultra stuff was plainly written in the entire thing. Like
it was built into it.
It was built into it. And what I mean by written into the entire thing is that the book that Preston Nichols published says that he didn't even remember any of this stuff until he started having these strange flashbacks. People started to approach him and say strange things. And then he started to go down this rabbit hole to try to figure out what happened to him. And it exploded open into a bunch of memories that he had forgotten in the Montauk area of New York. Okay?
Right.
Because he lived in that area. Yeah. So yeah, go on with so Al Bielek, and Al Bielek also is the one that uncovered most of the stuff that we know about the Philadelphia experiment, by the way.
He did, yeah. And I think I think that there's not a huge focus on him either, as far as what he has said, because he seems to get lost in the cracks with a lot of this stuff. But he, and then you have Basiago, who's promoted in a sense publicly over him as a layer of crazy, in a sense, by mainstream media. And so, okay, so what we saw with Bielek was that there was this sort of frequency-based portal that was created, just like what Basiago had described, and it was like,
and what Preston Nichols had described,
right,
in the Montauk Project, exactly.
Right, and it was almost like an elevator, and it could go to different locations, different planets, as well as through time. So like what they said, we got the same stuff in our data. And you have to understand that when we task this on remote viewing, we do get people who are just lying and making stuff up, right? So as far as I'm concerned, having been in the field so long and doing projects like for business, figuring stuff out, like coming to major conclusions that either make them a lot of money, or doing it for intelligence purposes, doing counterterror, and all the work that I've ever done, I know how to trust the data. I know how to task it. And I know, so I trust what we have on this is true. Otherwise, we wouldn't be getting what the data is saying.
Well,
it just wouldn't happen. It's impossible.
Also you're tasking this blind to
it's
several
all blind.
remote
They don't
viewers.
know their views.
They don't know.
Right.
And then you're getting the data back, and the data, the consistency in the data from multiple different people is what's giving you the information as to whether or not something is, or the whole picture of it, right?
Right, exactly.
What's true and what's not.
Yeah. So here, this is an interesting thing. So there was this guy that we had worked with back in the like 90s, early 2000s, and he was sort of an intermediary guy between in the intelligence world, right? Because look, we weren't like anything like intelligence people. We were literally just a civilian organization who was doing very well with remote viewing and was funded by a private investor. And we were getting lots of jobs. So we would have these sort of like handlers for intelligence who would say, hey, you want to do this? You want to do this for us? You want to do that for us? And it's not, we were on the inside of anything at all. Like, because, you know, in this world that we live in right now, if you say anything like that, then automatically you're a freaking CIA double agent. And you're
Right,
over
right.
the conspiracy community, right? And I get that all the time. People will say, I think you're CIA. I think you're this or that. But no, it's not how it works. It's just
rude.
Rude. So the way it always worked was that you'd have this person who would be like, you want to work on this project? You know, these people need help with this. And you're like, okay. And you really don't, like, these projects will be classified and you have no idea like what they are. You just provide information, right? Some of them you get to know a little bit, and that's all it is. Like, that's it. You don't have any other interaction. But anyway, this one guy interacted a little bit, and he said that this guy actually came from working in the MK Ultra program in the past. So this guy that he was working with us a bit, and he said at one point, he said, this is like the 90s. He said, did you know that you didn't know, actually, because this wasn't out yet, as far as I knew, that the CIA, I think he said the CIA has a quantum computer that can get snippets of the future. And we can see these events that are going to happen, but we don't necessarily know the context. And I was like, yeah, whatever. I don't know about that. And then later on, we didn't remote view or anything. It was just like something that he said. And then we were like, later on, these articles started coming out on the like Express UK or something, these websites that do more conspiratorial strange stuff about this chronovisor that the Vatican had, which was literally what he was talking about. And he said that the technology had been around for a very long time. They'd had it for a long time. So one thing I found very interesting that may be a correlation in our data when looking at some of this stuff, for instance, like the 30 and back program, was that it seems to me that at a certain point, aspects of remote viewing kind of intertwined with MK Ultra. So you think about these different programs, remote viewing program, MK Ultra program, and they're going down their own separate tracks. Now, MK Ultra, some of these scientists probably started to get these people to perceive future events and scenarios by brainwashing them into it. And then also maybe the chronovisor started picking up on the same scenarios that these guys were seeing on the MK Ultra side. And then on the remote viewing, straight remote viewing side, non-MK Ultra, they started to see these same things occur in the future. So what if there's some massive event in the future, and the whole 30 and back program is to not necessarily time travel people to the future, but to MK them using whatever techniques they have, technology and drugs, for a period of time where they believe they are in the future, but they're actually in this heightened state of psychic awareness. And they believe they are living in a situation in the future and problem solving in order to bring solutions to the present, right? So they think they've been 30 years in the future, right? And then brought back. But they've really been MK'd into a future situation to problem solve for us right now.
That's like what's so weird about that is that situation is why they're trying to develop the quantum computing technology in the first place.
Right.
It's to run scenarios and get answers back quicker. So
right. So
that makes sense.
This is like what our data points to. It's kind of mind-blowing, right?
It is.
Yeah.
So and yeah, there have been many people that have claimed to have traveled to the future or traveled back in time. Actually, Andrew Basiago did report that he went back in time, and he even can show you. There's a picture that he references of him at the Gettysburg Address there, and he can even explain certain details about the photo that are really bizarre. Like that are actually hard to unexplain, which is that this is him in the foreground here, this little child, I guess. And now I don't really exactly know how this works. Like, was it when he was a child he started getting
Yeah,
introduced
when
into
he
the
was a
program?
child.
Yeah. Now, if you look at his shoes, you'll notice that the shoes are bigger. They're like
Right.
too big for his feet. And he said that when he arrived there, for some reason, he didn't have his shoes and had to get a pair of shoes like while he was there. I don't know how that happened. I can't remember the exact details, but that's weird. And then you can see way in the background, that is President Lincoln actually
Right.
at the address, like way in the back there.
Yeah, right. Right.
It's just weird,
It
you
is
know?
weird. Yeah. It's weird. I mean, that's the thing with, Basiago's stuff. It's like it's hard to pick apart, man.
It's
It's
hard.
hard to
Yeah.
pick apart.
Well, and it would be if the whole thing was they have to go through this program first so that they can be deemed not credible if any of this goes public, right?
Right.
So now
Right.
you don't know of what Basiago is saying is real and what's not. And maybe a portion of it is real, but a portion of it is absolutely like
Right.
in your head ridiculous. And now
Right.
you can discount the entire thing. That's convenient.
Well, see, this is the other thing that happens too, is that one thing that you've noticed and I've noticed is that they will place these crazier stories over a situation
Yeah.
that has very solid relevant stuff. Like, for instance, when you get to the moon, our moon, Alan Sturm had made a coffee table book, I think back in the like 2008 or something, where he basically picked through all the NASA photographs of the moon's surface and emphasized everything that looked like a structure. And he was
What was
like
his
there were
name again?
Alan Sturm, Sturm. I think it's called something about structures on the moon.
Yes, I remember this.
So it was a coffee table book. He got threatened big time, and he had to pull the book.
I
The
think we
IRS
I
took his
think we
money.
interviewed him at one
His
point.
book is fantastic because here's the deal. They would love it if you just focused on, like, let's just say the Apollo 20 landing that never actually happened and they found aliens in a crashed ship. Okay? That is a fake story. They start to layer these stories on top so that when people are entering to begin to try to understand what's going on, they hit all those crazy top level stories that get discredited. When the thing that will actually turn people's minds around is a book like Alan Sturm created. That book was basically shut down after a couple of years because people were like, there are structures on the moon. It's undeniable. These are NASA photographs. He's just circling them.
Yeah.
And they don't want you to look at that.
Right.
So you think of Mars. It's like, there are structures on Mars. They don't want you to look at that. They want you to look at the crazy jump room stuff, right? Even though there's aspects that are real, they would much rather you focus on that because they can discredit it than the structures sitting there in Cydonia Mensa.
Yeah, and you're not even paying attention to it because
Right.
there's something much crazier that was put in front of it.
Right. Right.
Which totally makes sense.
Yeah.
And who knows, whether there are jump rooms or not, it doesn't actually matter at this point.
It doesn't matter. Nobody's going to believe the jump rooms.
Yeah. Well, and the crazy thing though is like, what the heck is on Mars? Because you have a very, very smart individual, Percival Lowell, who made it his life's work to study Mars. He came for money, knew he was never going to have to work his whole life, but he was determined to do something good with that opportunity. Mathematician, astronomer, ended up building a gigantic telescope in Arizona. So he got advice. I think his name was Pickering's or something, another astronomer, on where to build, the best observatory. And Arizona was brought up because of, its height,
right?
How high it is. So there's less atmosphere you have to go through, and the fact that Arizona is mainly cloudless. And so as Mars is coming by in its orbit, he would spend all of that time studying Mars. What's crazy is this is not just a normal dude. We're talking about the guy that figured out Pluto. This
Right.
guy this
Right.
guy found, before he died, he found Pluto. He knew it was there. They just needed to find it. So they were using mathematics to figure out its exact place and then to photograph it using the telescopes. As soon as he built his telescope, it was like a 21 or 24-inch glass, you know, the telescope. He immediately started looking into the sky, started looking at Mars and different things. And he had an entirely new telescope with even bigger glass developed so that he could see even closer
Right.
into the surface, right? And so now this guy is not a schlep, is my point.
Right.
And he's looking at Mars and he's seeing canals, what another astronomer called Canali, an Italian astronomer, can't remember his name. And
he's seeing canals, right?
He's seeing canals. He goes through the process of even showing where the canals are and all of this stuff. And then later on, this very mysterious thing happens where, I mean, there was a lot of discussion, excited discussion about this because he was claiming that there was a civilization there right now that was building canals because Mars had, it was like desert. They had difficulty with water, and he could see that there were some type of man-made canals that either had been built or were being built now. And he drew them out. And this is what you're looking at right here, like what this system looked like. Now, there are different images of this. Okay, now, what I think is really kind of crazy is it wasn't just him. There were other astronomers that had also seen the canals. And then eventually, some guy gets a bigger telescope at a time when Mars was coming closer to Earth. And he didn't find any canals at all and called the entire thing, threw the entire thing out, essentially. Right. But really think about it. It's like but he was like, Percival was kind of arguing this, and there were even guys on his team that came in to discount the whole thing, basically claiming that these were psychological things that these people were seeing and going through. And they wanted the canals to be there. And so they were claiming it was there, and so what's I find so strange about this is that there is this strange obsession that humans have with going to Mars.
Right.
Maybe it's because it's the closest planet. I get it. Like,
Well, I mean, okay, so tangentially, we have seen humans on Mars. I mean, tangentially, from the standpoint of, in some of the projects that we've worked on, there have been like a viewer or two will pick up a human there doing something, like, and it hasn't ever been anything that we've actually chased after, because we don't necessarily have a good way to task, because there's nothing like, because when you task things in a remote viewing, you task more or less off of knowns, photographs, solids, and we don't have any like more solid-ish type evidence that humans are on Mars, but tangentially we do occasionally pick up a human there on Mars, right, in some of this stuff that we're working on. There's that one story, for instance, of that woman. She was working at NASA, and they were like the night crew, and it was like after one of the landers had made the touchdown of surface, and she and the crew, 6 other people, were watching the feed, and they saw like 2 astronaut-ish type people walking towards the lander, right? We had viewed that. Yes, she did see that. Now, whether that was because like on Earth, or actually on Mars, Martians. I don't know.
Yeah. Like, was that here, or were those actually Martians?
Right. Because I'm telling you, there's a lot of filming in the deserts around these situations, and then passed off as being on another planet.
Very interesting. So I think that this idea that these canals exist and that there could potentially be life on Mars is really interesting. The fact that you guys have peripherally viewed some of that stuff, like kind of come into contact with it, is really interesting.
Well,
right?
there is life there. There are rudimentary life forms like plants.
Well,
there are rudimentary life forms like lizardy type things
they're trying to hide from us too,
right?
Though. Right. It's like there was even content taken from Mars and then it was analyzed, and half the scientists said that there was microbial life in this, and then the other half said no, that there isn't, there's not enough. But it's like, then we just went the route of no, there's not, instead of being like, well, all of these accounts from these other scientists said that there's microbial life in the dirt and the sand there, right? Which is like really interesting. I mean, it's kind of bizarre. And I think we're going to have to end this show soon, but I want to get into a little bit of the esoteric stuff here, because we did talk about that at the, like, basically in the intro, and we never know how these episodes are going to go because we just get into really interesting conversations here.
I know.
But yeah, just to cover this, what's interesting about Mars, I think, is that Mars is named for the Roman god of war, right? Ares is the Greek equivalent to Mars. Mars is the Roman. And Ares and the ram are symbols of Mars, right? And the ram has like deep occult symbolism. I mean, we get more into that. But so according to space.com, billions of years ago, Mars used to have a global magnetic field, but it shut down for reasons that are still unknown about 4 billion years ago, leaving the atmosphere unshielded to radiation and causing it to bleed over time, basically into space. Some think that the ram with its circular horns to the sides is a symbol for Mars' magnetic field, which is pretty interesting.
Wow. Yeah.
So Mars also has 2 tiny moons, Phobos and Deimos. Now, this is derived from the Greek for fear and panic. Mars, god of war. Fear and panic are his sons, right?
Yeah, fear and panic, man.
Yeah, so 2 of the Mars children were the gods for fear and terror, and they note this in a bunch of different pop culture. Like, they'll talk about fear and panic as a part of different things and different things, different movies and cartoons and stuff. So this is kind of interesting. So, there's a few really famous tarot card sets. One of them is the Sforza set, the Sforza Visconti set. That's the first set ever. We'll get into that in a different episode. But the Rider-Waite deck is kind of the more common deck, and it shows basically the tarot, the Emperor tarot card. It shows an emperor seated on a ram-adorned throne, which is a symbol for Mars.
Right.
And if you think about it, it's like Mars does, in a way, this could mean a couple of different things that I'm going to point out here. One is that Mars and the ram are synonymous with war. And if someone is to take power, it's usually on the Earth. It's usually through warring that they're taking power, right? Another interesting thing to point out here is that Nostradamus said, he had quatrains that basically talked about the year 1999, talking about Mars reigning after. And actually, what's interesting is that Mars in this case referred to communism.
Oh, okay.
And what's interesting is that Emperor tarot card that she just had up had this red gown on, which is like the color of all of these communist flags are usually red. And with Mars reigning, which is what Nostradamus was talking about, it's just interesting that, you can kind of point to all of that stuff, right? So the month of March is named after Mars, which you guys knew. First month of the most ancient Roman calendar. By some accounts, Mars, the god in Roman mythology, is the father of Remus and Romulus, who founded Rome. So some basically take that makes Mars the progenitor of the Roman people, which is also interesting because the Romans were just excellent at conquering.
Right.
Yeah. So they were, to some extent, worshiping Mars. Yeah, and then what I thought was the most interesting, just from a small deep dive on this, is that there was a relic. We are going to need to look into this. There was a relic we found called the Spear of Mars.
Right, like the Spear of Destiny.
I thought they were the same, but we're not sure, actually.
Right, right. Because the spear of destiny, what if somebody has a spear of destiny, they hold the power of
They're
controlling the
undefeatable
planet
in
or something.
war,
Yeah, at war,
which
right?
is why
It,
Hitler was looking for it so much, like why
it's
he
got to
wanted
be
it.
the same thing, right? I mean,
Now, what's weird is, okay, so reportedly this was kept in the former residence of the kings of Rome and was said to move, tremble, or vibrate at impending war or other danger. And it reportedly vibrated before Caesar was assassinated.
wow,
Yeah.
wow,
So like the spirit now what's funny is like I think it has to be the spear of destiny.
right.
However, it was hard to draw, like there wasn't enough information about it in the dives that we were doing to really connect the two. You know, there, it's possible that there is one more than one spear, but it sounds a little too close to, you know.
Right. Right. It's the same same mythology underlying them
Yeah.
both. Yeah. Huh.
Well, and so for everybody at home, if you guys are really interested in these types of relic stuff, like we did a awesome series on rise.tv called the Relics of Power, and these are all the relics of history that Hitler was searching for in his mad pursuit of becoming the biggest power in the world. I mean, we're talking about the Spear of Destiny, the Ark of the Covenant, the Holy Grail, maps to the Holy Grail that were hidden in paintings that you never knew about. The Rings of Power, which were actually, you know, King Solomon's rings that he was using to control demons. We talk about the Crown of Thorns. Really, very, very cool series. If you guys haven't seen it, I totally recommend you go and check that out. Yeah. Well, anyway, so I think we're going to get into a lot more in the next episode about a little bit more of this esoteric stuff, but we're going to be getting into Phobos and more about Mars in that conversation. So,
Yeah.
thank you guys so much for being with us. John, you're the best. Thank you for being with us. And yeah, I hope you guys thought that this episode was as out of this world as we did.